He is a research fellow at the University of the Free State, Cloete. His main research interest is governance systems in the public sector and local governance. Dr. Cloete has authored 2 textbooks, one on skills development in South Africa and one on human resources development in local government. He has developed and presented courses. His course on human resources development has been rolled out nationally with over 11,000 municipal officials being trained. Dr. Cloete speaks at conferences and is a regular guest on national radio and television and occasional newspaper columnist. He hosts the Great Governance ZA podcast, which highlights the hidden stories of excellence in local government so that others are motivated to ethically lead and transform our communities. Put your hands together for Dr. Harlan.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Colleagues, I will be brief, but I think it's an important conversation. I was asked, I will go to the slide. I think I'll come back to this one. But this was my brief to offer a realistic view of where government is at, especially in these uncertain times as we head towards the elections. I think next year is a very important election, and whether we like it or not, we will get a new government. One of the major challenges that we are faced at local government level sphere, that's where community radio is at. And then third, it would be nice to hear the bad, but also recognize the good or hope where there is some. And so what I've done is I've titled, I've just went back. So what we want to do is just talk about state government governance. Some of the previous speakers have talked about that. Then looking at the pretext, because if we want to understand where we are now, our context, we have to take a step back and look at our pretext, and so that we can look at what the post-text will look like 10 years from now. But what are the things that we need to do now? And then the National Development Plan, which summarizes government's thinking on that. So, United diplomat Sharon Powell was credited for defining the term upstander. And she says an upstander is someone who speaks or acts in support of an individual or a cause, particularly someone who intervenes on behalf of a person being attacked or bullied, as opposed to being a bystander. And if we look at community radio, I think that is exactly what we are. Upstanders is that we speak for those who cannot speak for themselves. You know, we are the voice of people. We are often advocates, is that we speak for those who cannot really speak for themselves. Now, if we look at Barack Obama was in South Africa in 2018, and this is what he said where democracy is, the space where we operate in. Democracy means being in touch and in tune with life as it is lived in our communities. And that's what we should expect from our leaders. It depends upon cultivating leaders at the grassroots level, where we at, who can help bring about change and implement it on the ground, and can tell leaders in fancy buildings that this isn't working down here. That's what Barack says. And he says that to make democracy work, Madiba showed us that we also have to keep teaching our children and ourselves, and this is really hard, to engage with people not only who look different to us, but who also hold different views. This is hard work, he says. That is what he said in 2018. If I bring our discussion to, in research we say we always start broad and we funnel it down. The United or worldwide, there is the Sustainable Development Goals. What are the challenges in the world and what is it that we're working towards? And so we call them the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, about what it is that what this is about. And it is important, this slide, because for us to frame our work then within the slide, is that we want a world where there is no poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, quality education, gender equality, males and females being treated equally, equal pay, clean water and sanitation, affordable clean energy, decent work and economic growth, industry innovation and infrastructure, reduced inequalities, sustainable cities and communities, climate action, life below water, life on land, 16 peace and justice and strong institutions, that one is my favorite, and partnerships for these goals. And I think it is important that we frame our work within this. Now, if we look at the definitions, I'll be very brief. The state is the permanent city. The state goes nowhere. Government, the difference between the state, that's why we can talk about state capture, because the state exists to look after the welfare of the people. That's the role of the state. The state must look after the people, that's why people pay taxes. The previous speaker spoke about we operate from a very low tax base. 29 million people in this country are on social grants. It's not sustainable. 7 million only pay taxes. And so the state exists to look after the welfare of the people. Government, they come and go. That's why we have spheres of government levels. The national, the provincial, and local government. Local government is where we at. And governance is then the action or the behavior of that government. So government, there's governance everywhere, in the church, in the school, in the clubs, in societies. So governance has got to do with behavior, how a government behaves. Is it open? Is it transparent? Is it accountability? How does that government behave? If you look at the governance in South Africa, one of my academic heroes was this guy called Professor Sampieter Blanche. Have you heard of him? Professor Sampieter Blanche was is my academic hero. And Professor Sampieter Blanche wrote a book in 2012. He wrote other books. But this book he called Lost in Transformation. In Afrikaans he wrote it Verdeelde Land. And in this book he unpacks in 2012 already, why is it that our transformation efforts started in 1994 was not working. That's a decade ago. Right? A decade ago, he analyzed why our transformation efforts are not working. And it's amazing reading that 10 years down what he's saying. And I'll take you through this. He says, we did not succeed in properly addressing the apartheid legacy of poverty, unemployment, and growing inequality. Remember, the law is gone, the legacy of that law continues. And so it's very easy sometimes here, people say, man, apartheid is long gone. Why don't you get over it? The legacy of that law continues. And the World Bank, which my previous colleague says, the World Bank confirmed South Africa is the most unequal country in the world. Excessive wealth, top billing, and excessive poverty. Santon, Alexandra. We did not succeed in putting a more moral and humane system in place. We must not be fooled, colleagues. Apartheid was the most evil, murderous system that could be corrupt. It was not a beautiful system. And so we did not succeed to put a better system in place that recognized everybody's humanity. There are certain, in Zulu we say, Sawubona, I see you. There are people who are still not seen. We've got in this country the haves, the have-nots, and the never-hads. You know? And so there are people for which the long nightmares never ended. And so the system that we currently have, the capitalist system, whatever way we're going to call it, has not produced what it promised to produce in 94. That's the reality. The World Bank confirms it, that the economic policies of the ANC government has not managed to bring people out of poverty. We've got now a black elite, you know, interested in the murk and the perk. And once I'm in, you know, it's my turn to eat. It's our turn to eat now. It says, hey man, I didn't struggle to be poor. It's my turn to eat now. And so we've got that's what Professor Shampri said, and you can agree or disagree with him. But we've got a black elite, get rich as quickly as possible by any means necessary. Then we've got a tiny minority that have been economically empowered of the black elite, assimilated. So our children attend schools together now and speak this beautiful English, but you know, and it's a false belief that everything is hunky-dory in South Africa. And so we have economic minorities in this country and political majorities. There's a disconnect there between economic minorities, right? And so we did not create this people-centered society that Bishop Tutu talked about, the rainbow people of God. It's a beautiful concept, yes, that works on a Friday, Bob Fridays and all of these things, but then we all go back into our own little corners. You know, this four-nation theory of Africans in that, coloreds there, and Indians there, and whites in this little corner after the final whistle. And so it's a false social cohesion. And who's African and who's not? You know, we haven't even got there. And once we haven't even had honest, frank discussion with ourselves about who's African, and who in this pot Somalians and Nigerians, and then another side of us comes to the fore. And so we haven't dealt with these issues of this narrative. 6, he says, we've got this perpetuation of this unequal power relations between the non-racial elite. The non-racial elite, because the elites are ruling. It's no longer just white people with economic power, it's elitists, which is non-racial elite that have not come to terms with the realities of South Africa. There's hardly social solidarity. We must not be fooled that food parcels is not social solidarity. And so it may be good for our conscience, but it's not real social solidarity where I feel it, where there's real empathy is what he says. We've got a political economic system that created this mess that just continues. So business, we never had a wealth tax. Remember, business profited through apartheid in a big way. And so he was a champion for some sort of a wealth tax to get to narrow this gap. Unemployment and inequality has become more severe. 10 years ago he said that. Look at our reality today. It's even worse. Unemployment, poverty, right? And number 10 he says, what went wrong was we had this compromise. You know, this compromise between the ANC and the Broeders resulted in this what we have now. A small, tiny elite being in control, who are in control. That was 2012. At the same time, government adopted what is called the National Development Plan in 2012, which is an excellent plan, and all political parties, all of your parties, they agree with this National Development Plan, saying that this is the consensus of South Africans, this is the way we need to go. What is the National Development Plan? And so the National Development Plan highlighted 9 challenges of South Africa, which was confirmed there. Unemployment, I talked about that. Education challenges. For the majority of South Africans, the nightmare is still their township schools. I was at Bloemhof to watch the Woordfeest is on in Stellenbosch now. Bloemhof is like a university, but so is the school where my kids were, Paul Boys High. It's like a university. Paul Gymnasium is a university in terms of resources and access and grades, etc. So the majority of South Africans are still not getting equal or proper access to education. Our infrastructure is aging. Marginalized poor, I talked about that, sustainability, health care. I don't know how we're going to do this, colleagues, but equal access to health care is a must. If you do not have medical aid in this country, and you have a toothache, it's set, where is it? It's Sunday now. I'll be lucky if I get help at the state hospital by Thursday. If I have medical aid, then I can go to the dentist for the emergency and have it out. It's so unfair. And so healthcare, equal, if COVID taught us nothing, it should have taught us that equal access to healthcare. I don't know how we're going to do it, but it's a must in terms of how we're going to do that. The public service, corruption, public service is in a mess, and corruption did not start in '94. Corruption is so part and parcel of the South African psyche. Whether we like, there's a narrative that says corruption started in '94. No, it started long before that. You know, we are tiny, we're a minority, 13% decided for 87%, etc. in terms of land, in terms of the Broederbond, and how society was organized. So corruption did not start in '94. It's so part and parcel of our DNA. It's part of our institutional knowledge that was just transferred to the black elite. It's a fact, right? And then we have this divided society that I talked about. So government had a review of this NDP. The report came out last week, which makes for fascinating reading. And this report is the cross-cutting long-term plan for South Africa. When they adopted it in 2012, it was 2030, and says that envisioned the type of society that we wanted. This says that we have not made progress. And the report says, as it said in 2012, if we are going to get out of our mess, it will be through leadership and active citizenry. Citizens that get involved. Leadership, not in government, leadership at all levels of our society. In the church, in the business, in the sports, everywhere. Now look at the leadership in our country. I'll take you to the sports, then you will see it's a mess. I'll take you to health, it's a mess. I take you to the church, dare I say, and the church is silent, coerced, doing up to silent. Where the church was at the forefront in speaking against injustice, the church has become silent. And colleagues, the more we say Jesus, the more we say justice. You can't have Jesus and justice not in one sentence. And so Jesus, justice. The church is silent on issues of justice and Jesus. And that is what the NDP says. The NDP talks about deep-rooted in the legacy of the law, poverty. I talked about that, unemployment, corruption. We talked about the World Bank. Why does these problems persist? We are excellent in saying one thing, we are wrong, we don't do it. State capacity, if we need to improve state capacity and inappropriate policy management. We've got incoherent planning, and which leads to this. And so instead of a capable state in South Africa, we have an increasingly corrupt state. Increasingly corrupt state. Instead of proper planning seamlessly, as disjointed all over. Instead of an inclusive economy, my friend Arno van Niekerk wrote a book, Ubuntu Economics. Ubuntu means I am because we are. It's a beautiful South African proverb. I am because we are. I cannot eat and you don't eat. Imagine that that's the reality for South Africans. I'm having my sushi and platters here while you are watching me eat. It's not sustainable. And so the NDP says we are, instead of an inclusive economy, our economic policies excludes the majority of the people here. I talked about social cohesion, and then South Africans have some of the highest levels of violent interpersonal crime globally. We are a violent people. That's what the research shows. If you just press our buttons, then secure. Then you must just press our buttons and we go for one another. And so it's and especially against our women and our children. The highest levels of violence, we are highly stressed. Highly stressed. And it's a combination of factors. It's the trauma of apartheid and it's the trauma of this current system that we have. Every time it's load shedding, it sends a message to our brain. Damn it, man. Can't you just keep the lights on? It sends such a negative message to the brain. And so we are highly, highly stressed in terms of that. So, what must be done is what the NDP says. I like this word, partnerships, between private sector business, that my colleague spoke on, civil society, which is yourselves, government, and academia. Government says we can't do this, so we need a partnership. My colleague called it a social compact, but we need a partnership. Government can't do it alone. And so I think Christians must stop criticizing government and say, where can we help? Where can we help? You've used the word, a gift of the givers. I take my hat off every time. Gandhi says, I've got no problems with you, Jesus. But your Christians, that's another story. Yeah? Now the gift of the givers isn't doing exactly what you're saying. They live out, they're doing what we're supposed to be doing. But we are busy with other types of debates amongst ourselves that takes our eye off the goal. In the meantime, Imtiaz and his team, they just shoulder on. I did a podcast with him. I encourage you to listen to that podcast where I wanted to know his heart. Okay, almost done. So, Barak says, hope is not blind optimism. It is not ignoring the enormity of the task in the next 10 years or the roadblocks that stand in our path. He says, hope is that thing inside us that insists, despite all evidence to the contrary, that something better awaits us if we have the courage to reach for it and to work for it and to fight for it. It's not going to come. It's not going to come. Dare I say, with prayer alone. What does James say? Faith without works is meaningless. We will have to work for it and fight for it. Hope is the belief that destiny will not be written for us, but we write our own destiny. By the men and women who are not content to settle for the world as it is, who have the courage to remake the world as it should be. We started a campaign at our radio station on October, just to push back, and I borrowed it from Australia, just to say the world says everything comes together with the castle. But what about those that do not drink? Are we now being completely left out? So how do we push back narratives and create this world how we see it through our eyes instead of being tagged along? And so there are many other campaigns where I think we should be, our voice should be much louder heard. And so the root cause, what Professor Sabiteplan says, is that we need to examine the 120 years of unequal power relations in this country. We for the last 120 years, he says, maybe if we have a Justice and Reconciliation Commission to talk about to the old white elite and the new black elite about where this comes from. So that we have an honest assessment will bring us closer to what must be done to level the playing fields here. The question then should be, are the rich and the poor really citizens of the same South Africa? You know, that's what he asked. For as long as South Africa continues to be a lead in poverty, unemployment, and inequality, you and I have a collective responsibility to act to bring an end to it and work for a more just South Africa. That is our core, you know, in terms of making sure that we bridge that gap. We're going to go through that. That's what local government looks like. I just spent 3 days with a coalition government in Caledon, and with all councillors there, I've got great respect for the challenges of local government. There, it's a complete mess, you know, of dysfunctionality in terms of making sure that that works. But we operate in that space and we are silent, you know. And so the question then is, there's an African proverb that says, a leopard is chasing us, and you're asking me, is it male or female? We are in deep trouble here. And so the question that we should be asking, what is it that we must do? An honest discussion with one another. You know, instead of the petty things. You know, what is it? And in closing, I set out to change the narrative. And I said, I want to go and find out in local government what is there. Because the Auditor General report came out 2 years ago, and it was a mess again, but there was 23 municipalities that received clean audits. And so I started on a journey, and I'm hosting this podcast called Great Governance. I didn't want to say good is so good. You know, Great Britain is this tiny country called itself Great Britain, not Good Britain. And so I said, and I said, but then I want to find the great stories of excellence in local government. You will not believe I've produced about 91 episodes of these 20-minute conversations. I spoke to an advocate yesterday that we're releasing that podcast either tonight or next week on mediation and the power of mediation instead of litigation. Fascinating discussion that I've learned. And so I've interviewed the Stellenbosch municipalities and said, tell me why you are so great. Here's one from the from Luvuyo Maslaka, from the Winnie Madikizela, and they all share with me the positive stories. There's great stories out there. There are great public servants out there wanting to make, or that are making a difference, but they are not heard of. And so I'm on this life's mission to change that narrative and to say, but not all is lost. Justice Malala says this, and let it not be said of us, we are a nation of talkers, not doers, of politicians, not entrepreneurs. We analyze problems brilliantly, we solve them so poorly. We are a nation of great policies of little implementation. So if we should have a World Cup on policies now, colleagues, we'll beat Australia without having to practice. We are great in talking. Now I always say talk is downhill, working is uphill. Easy to talk, man. Easy to do presentations. Talk is downhill. That's another thing. The final thing that I've done is that's how I met Michelle. For the community radio sector, we designed a governance 5 IQ implementation framework. And you could even consider using it in this framework. Why we do what we do. It's such an important question. Is that we're taking this to government. I work with the governance coalition now, and we're using this framework. Why we do what we do. If we do not are clear about why we do what we do, I mean, Simon Sinek says they start with why. Then how is it being done? We need clear strategies about how is it being done. And then we need to have almost like a dashboard system. If we're not on track, how do we know? How do we self-correct? Just like the pilot through the turbulence, but come back on track. And then if you're not on track, what is being done about it? Is it processes that must change? Is it behavior that must change? Is it structure that must change? But what is it that must change if we are not happy with where we are? And then how do we lead and learn? Colleagues, I'm done. Catholic Bishop says, hope has two beautiful daughters. Their names are anger and courage. Anger at the way things are, and courage to see that they do not remain as they are. We cannot just remain angry. We are all collectively angry in this country with the state of affairs. But God must help us to give us the courage to then do something about these things that makes us so, that upsets us so much. We started this thing called knowledge sharing spaces, where I think one thing we do well in community radio is keep secrets. Sometimes even amongst Christians, I ask you, where do you get funding? Then you talk to me about the weather. And so, which program you're working on, then you keep it close to your chest as if it is your Vodacom. So Vodacom funds you, Wesley, I ask, Wesley, give me the contact, you talk to me. And so we want to create knowledge sharing spaces where Christians and people can freely share with one another, because if we withhold that from one another, we are holding our communities back. And I passionately believe in this, is that we can talk and talk and talk, but in the end we must get the stuff done. Other people use another word there, but I have kept it there. You must get the stuff done. Because talk will get us nowhere. We need action. Natalie, thank you so much for your time. Thank you.